Hi, my name is Peyton Wood. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Shakespeare in the Bush by Laura Bohannan. This article focuses on how worldview shapes the way people interpret stories, values, and cultural meanings. Bohannan's experience with the Tiv people in West Africa show how cultural background strongly influences what people consider to be logical, normal, or true. The main idea of Shakespeare in the Bush is that stories do not have universal meanings, they are interpreted through cultural worldview. Laura Bohannan attempts to tell the story of Hamlet to the Tiv people, believing the plot and themes would be universally understood. However, the Tiv reinterpret the story based on their own cultural norms, beliefs about family, marriage, and supernatural forces. Instead of agreeing with Bohannan's interpretation, they confidently correct her, showing that their worldview shapes a completely different understanding of the same story. This article clearly illustrates how worldview affects the interpretation of cultural meaning. Bohannan assumes that Shakespeare's themes, such as betrayal, madness, and revenge, are universal. However, the Tiv view the events in Hamlet through their own cultural lens. For example, they interpret Hamlet's father's ghost not as supernatural spirit, but as an omen or witchcraft explanation consisted by their beliefs. This shows that meaning is not inherent in the story itself, but created through cultural context. One ethnocentric bias in the article is Bohannan's assumption that Western interpretations of Hamlet are the correct or logical ones. At the beginning, she believes that the Tiv will naturally understand the story the same way that she does. This reflects an ethnocentric worldview because she initially measures the Tiv's interpretations against her own cultural standards. Her surprise when they disagree highlights how deeply worldview influences perception, even for trained anthropologists. The story challenges the idea that one's own cultural values are normal or superior. Bohannan expects the Tiv to accept her explanations, but instead they confidently argue their interpretations. This flips the power dynamic and shows that no culture has a monopoly on truth or logic. The Tiv are not confused, they are simply operating with a different cultural framework that is just as coherent as Bohannan's. A specific norm in my own culture is the emphasis on nuclear family structure and romantic love as the foundation of marriage. In American culture, it is considered normal for people to choose their partners independently and prioritize emotional connection. An outsider from a collectivist culture might view this as irresponsible or unstable, especially compared to cultures that value arranged marriages or extended family involvement. Their worldview would shape a very different interpretation of what successful relationships look like. A best practice for communication across cultures is suspending judgment and avoiding assumptions of universality. Bohannan's experience shows the importance of listening and allowing others to interpret meaning through their own worldview. For example, instead of correcting the Tiv's understanding of Hamlet, a more effective approach is recognizing that multiple interpretations can coexist. This mindset leads to more respectful and productive intercultural communication. A personal example of cultural misunderstanding can be seen in how humor is interpreted differently across cultures. In American culture, sarcasm is often used casually, but in other cultures it can be perceived as rude or confusing. This is similar to Bohannan's experience, where she assumes shared meaning but encounters a completely different interpretation. In both cases, differing worldviews influence how communication is received and understood. In conclusion, the most significant lesson from Shakespeare in the Bush is that worldview shapes perception more than we often realize. This article demonstrates that culture meaning is not universal and that assuming otherwise can lead to misunderstanding. By recognizing and respecting different worldviews, we can communicate more effectively and avoid ethnocentrism in intercultural interactions. For my APA reference, I have Bohannan L. 1966, Shakespeare in the Bush. Thank you.